Okay, the real story of the day is this possibility of a new war. And for me, it's one of the more complicated um, issues that I could possibly confront when dealing with a story. Full disclosure, I was in the Israeli army, so you're not going to get an unbiased opinion here, and I'm not going to pretend it is. Uh, as somebody who has studied this issue for years. I didn't have a long military career. I didn't have a senior position, so you don't have to take this as a military expert opinion. But I've done plenty of research on the country involved, Syria. I can tell you that normally I would be absolutely in favor of removing the Assad regime in any way possible. But it's not going to be that simple this time, and I'll explain why. Some people have started to treat the Assad regime in the past, I don't know, year, 2 years, 3 years due to ISIS as some sort of benevolent dictatorship that is the best alternative to ISIS. I'll never give that credence to them. I think the Assads, long before ISIS established themselves as probably one of the least desirable families of dictators in the world. They're basically a family monarchy. They're a minority regime in Syria. They stack the entire regime with members of their own sect of, I believe Alawites are considered a sect of Shia Islam, which to me, that's not a country I would support. It's not a country I would attack for that reason either. I don't think we should go to war with countries because of a system they had. Also, let me point out, I don't care what President Trump's feelings are right now, there is no official proof yet that this chemical attack was perpetrated by the Syrian government. It might have actually been perpetrated by a rebel group or by possibly another party that's also opposed to the Assad regime. So, I'm not going to go and say, just because I have a heavy dislike of the Assads and the Syrian government that they control, I'm not going to go say I'm going to support a war against them. To me, I've had a change in attitude a long time ago. I'd probably say around 2008 when the Congressman Ron Paul was running for president, that you can't fight every single battle. The United States is not in this world in order to be some sort of savior to anybody and everybody. Some of these countries are unsavable. The only thing that could save them is possibly some sort of religious miracle. And it's to me, it's a sad commentary. I have nothing against the people of Syria. I actually went to school with somebody from Syria. I wasn't really friends with him. I had a colleague at work who's Syrian, my old job. Very nice guy. He has a story of his own to tell, not really related to the conflict. So I don't have any malice towards the Syrian people. I do hate the Assad regime. I think the majority of Syrians for a long time have hated the Syrian regime. Now let me debunk all of these points that we should be allying with Syria, first of all, and that we should trust them. First of all, Syria has been a horrible dictatorship probably since it became independent, with brief periods of instability where they had like basically a charade of a democratic government, which wasn't really democratic up until the mid-60s. In the mid-60s, there came to be a number of issues coming up. First of all, before we get to that, in 1958, Syria were united with Egypt in what was called the United Arab Republic. That was a failure. It was part of the movement called Pan-Arabism. That's an issue that I might devote an entire article to on the blog. I could probably talk for hours about Pan-Arabism. But after that union failed in 1961 and Syria left the United Arab Republic, Pan-Arabism didn't die out. There was a Pan-Arab style movement, a Pan-Arab socialist movement called the Ba'ath Party. They took power after a series of coups and just basically power struggles between each other. The factions of the Ba'ath eventually eliminated all their opponents and seized complete power. In 1967, of course, the Syrians lost part of their country called the Golan Heights in the Six-Day War to the Israelis. Syria has always been the most obstinate enemy of the Israelis, probably more than the Palestinians even. They have a visceral hatred for them. I don't really care. It is what it is. It's not a rational hate. It's just they just hate them. And in fact, there's a belief that Syria, whether it was under the Assads or under their predecessors, a lot of Syrian nationalists believe that there is no independent Palestine. There is no independent Israel, obviously. There's not even an independent Jordan. Those should all be part of a greater Syria. So all of you talking about a Zionist world conspiracy, you should look up Greater Syria. It is an official policy of the Syrian government and of allied groups of the Syrian government that are, such as the Syrian Social National Party. So you can't go and criticize on the one hand the Jews, the Zionists as you call them too, when on the other side there's basically a movement that does the same thing in Syria. Look it up. Syrian Social Nationalist Party. That's a party that's allied with the Syrian government. They're not part of it. And the Syrian government itself does believe in a greater Syria going from current Syria through Lebanon, Jordan, and Israel and the Palestine Authority. Those would all be part of greater Syria. So that's up until the Assads took power, and including they kept going with that idea. General Hafez Assad, I think it might be pronounced Hafez. He took power in 1970 in something called the Corrective Revolution, and he's been a brutal dictator since then. They of course fought the October 1973 war, known as the Yom Kippur War in Israel, known as the Ramadan War in the Arab world. But after that, in 1976, another war broke out, a much less well-known war, known as the Lebanese Civil War. I think it's called the Second Lebanese Civil War. Because the first one was in the 50s. And by the way, this is all from memory, okay? I only have one article pulled up. It's only for one part of this. And everything else is from memory. If you want to check it out, send questions or look it up. Every topic I have is basically written history, okay? That doesn't mean that I have the only point of view, but look it up. Everything I'm talking about is from memory. This isn't something I just read 5 minutes ago. President Assad, he became a major supporter of the radical terrorism of the 1970s, the left-aligned Soviet terrorism, Soviet-sponsored terrorism, groups like especially PLO splinter groups. So in 1976, they actually went to bat, even though they officially are a socialist government. They went to bat for the conservative Catholic minority in Lebanon. Lebanon's a patchwork of different religious groups. And the Assads went there in support of the Christians who were threatened with being overrun by who? Sunni Muslims. The Syrian government under Assad has always been paranoid that one day these Sunnis are going to seize power and butcher them all. Who knows? Maybe they could be right. I don't know. Talking about hypotheticals is rough, okay? So, they have their hypotheticals, I have mine. So they believe that you can never, ever, ever let a radical, either a radical left, Sunni-dominated government in Lebanon, as it was in the 1970s would have been, or nowadays a jihadist government in Lebanon. They would never go for it. That's why Syria came to support Hezbollah, which more on that a little later. In Syria, there are these. There's this group called As-Saika, which is a Palestinian militant group, but in reality, the As-Saika means the thunderbolt. So As-Saika is basically a Palestinian militia that's completely subservient to the Syrian government. They have a number of groups that are like this, that are loyal to the Syrian government. Another one would be the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command. Okay, there's an alphabet soup of these. There's the PFLP, the original one. They've been allied to Syria at times, and then there's the PFLP-GC. It's confusing enough already, isn't it? They're completely under the thumb of the Syrians. They just do whatever they want. Okay, so there you go. So they became a state sponsor of terrorism in Lebanon. They support these Palestinian militias and Lebanese militias, and they were basically trying to maintain some sort of what they used to call in the Middle Ages suzerainty, which means that they were trying to force Lebanon to become a puppet state to them, which they succeeded in doing eventually. There was Israeli intervention, there was sponsorship by other Arab states of their opponents. It didn't work. Syria, until the mid-2000s, basically assumed control over the political landscape of Lebanon. And one of the ways they did that, they did this thing called the War of the Camps. It's part of the broader, bloody Syrian civil war. And about 3,500 people died in it. And what was the War of the Camps? So basically, there's this patchwork of refugee camps in Lebanon, because Lebanon, like all the other Arab states, they won't give citizenship to refugees, even though those refugees have been there since 1948 and 1967. These Palestinian refugees, they don't want them to ever adapt to life in the exile, so they would keep them essentially impoverished and as second-class citizens in their country. Now, I'm not going and dumping on the Lebanese, okay? So I have plenty of people who I know from Lebanon. It's a complicated system there. I can understand that they wouldn't want this massive flood of people getting citizenship and upsetting the demographic balance over there, which is very delicate. If you think demographics are hard in the United States with our racial politics, you should read up on Lebanon. They have and I'll probably do a smaller video on that, on why Lebanese politics is probably the least logical that you could find in the world, but it's a logic that makes sense in the context of Lebanon. Nothing you can do about it. That's the way they run their country. This War of the Camps, the Syrians utilized these stooges of theirs, what was called the Rejectionist Front, the hardline Palestinian groups, to fight the mainstream Palestinian groups under Yasser Arafat, and eventually force him to run away to Tunisia. Okay, both the Syrians did that and the Israelis did that, and they forced him to abandon the country. So he left, and thereafter Syria sort of developed Lebanon into its front porch, and used both the Palestinian groups and Hezbollah, this Shiite fanatic jihadist group, to fight against the Israelis. Now, you could ask, so what's wrong with that? I mean, the Israelis are the enemies of the Arabs. Why would we care? That's a valid point. But when the U.S. sent troops to be peacekeepers there, and I don't believe in peacekeeping missions. I think they're pointless. Hezbollah did bomb one of these. Let me see. I think it was in 1983. They did bomb a U.S. embassy and a barracks. The embassy left 63 people dead, and the suicide bomber. And Why am I not messing around here? I got a mouse. A second. They also bombed these barracks, killing 305 people. 241 of them were U.S. peacekeepers, 58 were French peacekeepers, 6 civilians, and 2 suicide bombers. And they did it because it was a statement of jihad. It was the first Islamic radical terror attack perpetrated against the United States, to my knowledge. If you can find one that was earlier, I'm happy to hear about it. I shouldn't say happy, but it is what it is. The only thing that many historians remember from the Lebanese Civil War was the so-called Sabra Shatila massacre. Okay, it was a massacre. The unfortunate truth is that hundreds of Palestinians were murdered. The lie that's told is that the Israelis did it. They did not do it. But that's irrelevant, okay? So we're still talking about the Assads. What did the Assads help perpetrate? You could talk about all of these murderous campaigns, the war of the camps. You had, let's see here, al-Za'atar, which was another Palestinian refugee camp. It was basically, at that point, that was in 1976, up to 3,000 Palestinians were murdered. Nobody heard anything about it. Why? Because the country that sponsored that attack was not Israel. It was Syria. It was Syria. So, look, I'm getting a little long-winded here. Long story short, the Syrian regime, under the Assads, has been responsible for decades of murder and mayhem and senseless violence. And I can never, ever, ever get into the heads of these people that think, they're good people. They're a good actor. We should be allied with them. That's their attitude. The problem with a lot of these alt-right people, that, you know, they're all about embracing Russia, embracing, you know, the what they call the real good guys, is that they don't do their research on them. Syria has never been a good force in the Middle East. If it was, then how the fuck did they get this way? Syria is, let me tell you another thing, that Syria, for all that they claim to do for the Palestinians, who are a stateless people, in Syria they deny them citizenship as well, okay? Now, I'm not a friend of the Palestinian people. I do have a couple Palestinian friends. I don't support any of their causes or anything. They don't support mine. So I mean, it's an even exchange. But for all the Syrian regime's support for the Palestinian people, they don't offer them citizenship. And worse than that, there's another minority up in the northeast of the country called the Kurds that until recently did not even get citizenship either. And they have absolutely nothing to do with any war with Syria so far. It's basically Syria just being a mean-spirited state. By the way, the Syrian nation, as it's known, the Syrian state, I should say. What's its official name? The Syrian Arab Republic. What's the name of its army? The Syrian Arab Army. This is despite the fact that Syria is not an entirely Arab country. Okay, there are minorities in Syria that are not Arab. Okay, there's the Kurds, there's Turkish minorities, so nevertheless they call it the Syrian Arab Army. Why? Because they still have that Arab identity, and they will always be a pan-Arabist or pan-Syrian, expansionist state. Anybody who comes to me and says, we should oppose the war because Syria is a good country is wrong. Okay, the reason you should oppose the war, despite everything that Syria has done and everything that I've talked to you about, which I think is everything I've talked about, the problems with the Syrian regime, is still not enough for me to say the United States should get into a war with Syria. I think if they really were giving it full thought, the countries that should be going to war against Syria are its neighbors. Okay, Turkey has absolutely no problem with its massive military. Why didn't they invade Syria? They've been letting other people take the hits for them for years. Why can't they invade Syria? Why? Because Turkey is becoming about as corrupt as Syria is. Turkey is becoming all of the negative things that they say about Syria. So you can't expect anything good from them. Saudi Arabia, which funds a lot of these rebel groups, they could have invaded Syria. Why didn't they invade Syria? Because Saudi Arabia likes to pay other people to do its dirty work. Israel, why couldn't they invade Syria? Israel can't invade Syria because, as well-intentioned as Israelis may be, they know from experience that they will never be accepted as the positive force for anything in the Middle East. They'll always be the black sheep there. There's nothing they can gain from it. Why can't Jordan go invade Syria? Well, really, Jordan would be the perfect country if it would have the military strength and stability to invade Syria. They have the most Syrian refugees there. They could organize a massive army to do it. And they have a very well-trained army. The problem is that Jordan is small population-wise compared to even Syria. And truthfully, the king of Jordan, who, by the way, is probably one of the more polished world leaders there is today, doesn't matter what part of the world you're talking about, King Abdullah is one of the more intelligent world leaders there is. He knows he doesn't have the clout at home, and he doesn't have the strength in the Arab world to really fight this through till the end. It would be a problem for him. So it's all a practicality issue. Iraq can't invade Syria, obviously, because they hardly even control their own territory. Egypt all these countries, the Middle East is a complete basket case. So the case for invading Syria is, in my opinion, on the shelf until there comes a country that really has a practical solution to actually giving them a government that would represent what they really need, the Syrian people. And that government doesn't exist. Syria is not a state with a uniform population or a homogeneous population, as they would probably say. It's a real problem for anybody to go in there and say, yeah, we're going to clean house here. That's why regime change, which is already a bad idea anywhere else, would be a disaster in Syria. You have to, in my opinion, there would have to be Russia that would go in there. Russia would go in there, and because they don't care about people's sensibilities, they could pretty much behead the Assad regime and install a regime that would be a benevolent dictatorship. But they won't do that because, as far as they're concerned, as we all know, and I'm not being naive here, I said that Russia could do it because Russia has the capability with the home front with very little criticism. They've never cared about long wars in the past. Russia could pull it off if they wanted to, but they have no reason to because they're fine the way it is. And Iran especially, they also control, Syria is basically a proxy state of Iran, while Lebanon is also to some degree a proxy state of Syria still. That's why the Syrians commit assassinations in Lebanon through Hezbollah. Okay, so we have a problem here. This is I'm sorry to say, ethically, I don't know if we could justify not invading, but practically, it's very hard for me to say yes, the United States should invade Syria, or for that matter, any of the other countries. I've said already that the country that I served in the army, Israel, should not invade either. So nobody go calling me a hypocrite. I don't think either country should invade. And those of you liberals or maybe neoconservatives that are saying, oh, this is like the Holocaust, you have to intervene and whatever. It's not like the Holocaust. A lot of you would probably use the parallel of FDR not bombing the trains to Auschwitz and the other death camps. This isn't the same thing. This isn't the same thing because over there was a clear, apparently from the accounts I've heard, there was a decision not to bomb the camps or not to bomb the railroads because they didn't want refugees coming out of the camps that they would have to absorb. That's the way the story's been told about that. I really am not well versed in it, so don't hold me to it. It's not the case here. You already have refugees that have fled in massive numbers. The Syrian government could care less if people run away. So this, in my opinion, is not of the same magnitude. The Aleppo siege was a major humanitarian disaster, but you know, it is what it is. I think that if Trump was to do something, I don't think it should be an invasion. It should be a more limited military role, something to really intimidate the Assads, intimidate them so they would never even say anything against him. And that could include a military action, but it should not be an invasion. Anyway, this video is over. This is Bold Like a Leopard on Facebook at Chef Leopard, or facebook.com/Chef Leopard, at Chef Leopard on Twitter. You got vid.me or VidMe. That's vid.me/Chef Leopard. I got startingleopard.blogspot.com for my blog. There's going to be a new post coming up on that, probably over the weekend, I hope. A long-term project I have. And coming soon, don't know when, minds.com as well. So this is Ramon with Bold Like a Leopard. We'll see you around the bend, and no war this time, please. I don't think that any of you want to see it, and I don't think that the world wants to see it, but, you know, could be that they're forcing him into it, and Trump, unfortunately, he has to show some better judgment. This is Ramon with Bold Like a Leopard, and we'll see you around the bend.